Okay, thank you again for being here. If you have registered again, please find your place at the table that you've been assigned to.
Others can now fill in places.
Okay, and now I think Mary June says we should be filling in places if there are empty seats at tables. Thank you very much. So, the information that will be presented to you at this meeting in large part was presented to the clergy of the diocese at the fall clergy conference. And at that clergy conference, we asked the clergy, should we bring together a meeting of the diocese itself, the members of bishops' committees, vestries, delegates to convention, wardens and treasurers, and so forth, in order that the information that had been presented to them could be distributed to a larger body of people, which then meant the cleric would be helped in passing this information along in the congregation. And the unanimous opinion of the clergy at the clergy conference was, yes, please do that as a beginning step to get this information to people. So that is why we're having the meeting today. If I could control the weather, it would be 70 degrees and sunny. But since I can't, well, there you go. So now the overview and purpose of the meeting itself. Okay, so there we go. Thank you. Okay, the overview and purpose of this meeting itself is to provide you with the best information about the financial challenges that we face as a diocese. Accurate information, because sometimes you might hear something but might not necessarily be actually accurate information. So we wanted you to have that. Secondly, we wanted you to know how we got to where we are today. What took place in the life of the diocese? What took place in the life of the world around us, in the financial world today, that got us to this place today? The next thing that we wanted to provide you is the steps that we've already taken. The steps that your diocesan council, finance committee, and so forth have already taken to help address the challenges that we have. Next, we wanted you to know how budgetary decisions are made in the Diocese of Utah. It is my belief or perception that there are people who think that the bishop sits down with two other people and over a glass of scotch, we make these decisions and then that's the end of the story. And if you're nodding your head, you're saying, yeah, that's exactly how we thought they were made. Isn't that how they're made? And the answer is no. But we'll get to actually how they are made because it's important for you to know this. Next, we want you to know what resources are available to the congregations to help you in your ministry, and also how you can exercise your own agency as members of our diocese to help shape our future. And we all have agency in this diocese, and so for instance, there are places that you can help, places you can plug into, and we'll be talking about that later. And if we think we don't have agency, well, that's simply not true in this diocese. And also, I think we're seeing right now in the world about us, young people exercising their agency, and many of whom can't even vote. So what we can see is that we all have agency in one way or another. In the diocese, there are ways for you to exercise your agency as we face the challenges that we have, as well as the opportunities that we have together as Episcopalians in Utah and northeastern Arizona. In addition to the presentations, you have the packet, which we'll be explaining further. And on the table, there are sheets of paper for you to ask questions. Write them down, please, and fill them out, and we will collect those at lunchtime. If some of the presentations are not clear, then we want to know that in order that we can respond to clarifying questions. Other questions that may be raised may not be addressed at this session simply because some of them may actually be decisions that are made by another person other than me. So for instance, if something you're asking can only be addressed by the diocesan council, and the diocesan council has not yet deliberated upon it, then that question simply cannot be answered. Okay, so again, the question sheets are on your table, and please do fill them out. Also, we will be posting the questions and responses to the website. So you'll be able to see those responses well if we don't get to all of the clarifying questions. All things will be put on there so you can review them. All right, now, one of the things that I think is important, let's go to the next slide, please, which is a blank screen. Let me tell you a little story. My wife left for Japan on Tuesday morning to go visit our first grandchild, a baby girl. And so she's over there right now, and I do have photos which I'm willing to show you. If you twist my arm, I will show you a few photographs. Now then, I drove her to the airport. Now, since she's been gone, how many times do you think the bed has been made? The answer is 0. Now, you see, she and I frankly don't get this, okay? But since she's not here, I can say whatever I want. Just don't report back. The bed in our bedroom, and this is not TMI, let me just alert you in advance. The bed in our bedroom has on it 6 pillows, 3 on her side, 3 on my side. And I just don't understand why we do that, because every night I get up there and toss 2 pillows off. See, and then the next day those pillows are supposed to come back. I don't get this at all. So far I've unmade half the bed, which is 2 pillows are on the floor, 1 pillow remains that I use at night. Her half of the bed, the 3 pillows are still there. How many times do you think I've run that dishwasher? Actually, it's been run once, because dishes were already there. Now let me also go into this a little bit further. When Amy and I decided that we were going to get married way back in 1981, one of the things that I did was I called back to Tacoma, Washington. We were living in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time. And we called back to Tacoma, Washington in order that I could tell my parents that I had met this person and that we were going to get married and so forth and so on. So I did, and I was speaking to my mother, and she was excited. And so I said, would you like to speak to Amy? And of course, my mother wanted to speak with Amy. So Amy gets on the phone, and I hear Amy go, oh, boy, I understand, I'm sure. My mother was apologizing to my wife. She said, I really tried with Scott. I really tried. But no matter what I did, he is still the messiest person in the world. And I'm sorry, but I really did try. Now, messiest person in the world is the polite Japanese mother way of saying he's a real slob. And so Japanese mothers are not the same as Jewish mothers in this, let me just say. Now what's the point of this? The point of this is yes, who would marry such a person like me? That's the who would marry such a person? And the answer is, it beats the heck out of me, because I thought I was going to be a monk. I really thought I was going to, and so the fact that someone actually wanted to get married to me was a moment of like, oh my goodness, how did that happen? And I still don't know, frankly. So now then, so let me give one more example of this, then I'll get to the point of all of this. Okay, so as I said, last Sunday, we were up in Logan for the annual visitation, and we arrived Saturday, and then Sunday morning the snowstorm began in Logan, and it was snowing really quite hard, and we had to get back home, and so we had to go through Sardine Canyon, and it was really bad going through that canyon. So prior to leaving Logan, Amy and I stopped at Subway so she could get a sandwich just in case, and a banana, just in case we got stranded in Sardine Canyon. She would have the Subway sandwich and this banana. And she said, do you want to buy a sandwich? And I said, no, because if we get to Brigham City, I can get chicken gizzards. So anyway, so I'm holding out, hoping we'll get to Brigham City, which we did, and I bought a pound of chicken gizzards. Now then, that's not the point. The point is, I take her to the airport early on Tuesday morning, and then I get a text from Amy at the airport saying, I think I left the banana in your car. Would you check to make sure? It wasn't I was going to take it back to the airport, for goodness sakes, but just wanted to alert me the banana may still be in the car. So yesterday, this was Tuesday morning, so yesterday I looked, and lo and behold, that banana's still in the car. Now this is all a way of saying, if you didn't register and don't have a lunch, I got a banana for you. And it's in great shape because, it's been so cold, that banana is still holding up really well. Now what is the point of all of this? I'm getting there. Okay, the point of all of this is that actually Amy decided that I was worth getting married to. And frankly, I didn't think that any person would ever think that of me. Never. And so therefore there's that. And then I think about, there's this God who loves me and loves you so much that God decided to send us Jesus as grace. So what I'm saying here is you and I have been saved by grace, and you and I are called upon as Christian people with a work that we are called upon to do, to spread the gospel as far as we can, to as many people as we can, in as many ways as we can. Why are we doing this today? It's to give you that information, but also to look forward, to simply say, there are huge opportunities here, and I personally, as the bishop, would really like to get to some of them. In order to get there, as far as the finances are concerned, then we have to make changes, and we all have to work hard to get there, because the purpose of this is there's good news to be shared. There are lives to be saved. There are actions to be taken to help change the world in which we live for the better, so it more accurately reflects the city of God. So it more accurately reflects a place where the dignity of people are being respected. So it more accurately reflects a place where people can feel safe, in order that more people might have these simple advantages that I had growing up, just because I had parents who loved me and provided for me. There's a huge work out there that needs to get done, and you and I are specially outfitted, I believe, as Episcopalians to do that work. And why are we doing this? Because, my brothers and sisters, there's a huge field out there of people waiting to hear the good news, especially as we Episcopalians understand it to be. And that involves many different ways that it can happen, each in its own local way. It might be through community conversations, it might be through feeding programs, it might be through goodness knows what. But there's a whole group of people out there that wish they could find a church that was really there, that loved them and welcomed them as they are. And we are that church. We are that church. That's why we're about the business of being a diocese. That's why, overarching here today, we're here. So, thank you very much. This time, Mary June will come up to go over what's in the packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Hayashi. I ask you now to open your notebooks and to take a look at the yellow agenda on the inside left. That is two-sided, as are most of our documents. You will see the name of the presentation, the speaker who will be giving the presentation, and then the document number that you either need during the presentation. It will often simply be the slideshow that you're looking at, so there is room on those pages for you to take notes on the information you're hearing about each slide. And the speakers will remind you to pull up that document number before the speaker begins. The far right-hand column gives document information about things that relate to that presentation that are not needed immediately during the presentation. Take them home, read them, take a look. They're often quite a bit of heavy information. So just look in the upper right corner of any document and you will see a heavy black number, and that is what is being referred to on the agenda sheet. Lunch may not come at the same place as it is in the agenda. We have a time certain to serve our lunch, and so whatever presentation ends before that time certain, we'll move to lunch and we'll regather. Lunch will be served in 4 lines, and so it should go very quickly for serving. And if you have ordered a special meal, vegetarian, gluten-free, or any other special request, your entree will be served from the kitchen. So please go directly to the kitchen door and tell them which special meal you have already ordered. Now, are there people who have an unused space at your table? Is there a free chair at your table? Okay, keep hands up. Keep hands up. Now, please lower your hand if there is no packet at that seat. So, how many free packets are there not being used? Okay, would you stand and hold the packet not being claimed? Stand and hold the unclaimed packet. Great. And we had a number of people who could not come in the weather. Okay, now also your question sheets. We have more of these. 1 question per sheet. And when you are finished, either wave them in the air and they'll be collected by a staff member, or take them to a basket that you will see on the outer edges of the room. Okay, just look around. Baskets are coming. Yes, Jody.
Some of us ended up parking out on the street.
Yes.
Do we really need to move 2 hours?
Is there Saturday parking?
Yeah, it's 2 hours.
It's 2 hours, yes. So my suggestion is at lunchtime. At the end of lunch, you go stick a little more money in. Sorry about that. We don't have enough parking for all of this group.
That's asking to move your car.
Or do you have to move it?
Better
No.
money.
Do you have to move it? Oh, dang. I'm sorry. Yes, you have to move it. Maybe a couple of you can trade. Yes. Hang on, Ron is giving us information.
Beyond 300 east, there are no meters on the north side of the road. So if you're going to walk an extra block or so, you can park up there for as long as you wanted, and there is no meter.
Okay, if you move east of 300 east, there are no meters on the north side of the roads. Okay, thank you. All right, so this packet of information is yours to take, and we are now going to proceed with our first presentation, an overview of the Perpetual Trust of St. Peter and St. Paul. So please do take out document number 2. So you might want to keep your agenda sort of in front of you toward the center of the table, and then take out each document as needed. And I introduced our Chief Financial Officer of the Diocese, the Reverend Canon Steve Anderson.
Thank you, Canon Nestler and Bishop Ayashi. Now that you're all warmed up, we'll get into the business of this. My task for this first presentation is to talk a little bit about the Perpetual Trust. Follow along if you would, please. Do I have the... When the diocese received the proceeds from the sale of St. Mark's Hospital, the funds were placed into a permanent perpetual trust. Now, this trust is separate and independent from the diocese. The trust has its own trustees. The diocese is the beneficiary of the trust. But the trust and its trustees are primarily, legally, and morally obligated to serve the interests of the trust, which is to preserve its existence and its balance into perpetuity. The trust is simply an investment account. It's a collection of trust assets. It's a managed portfolio. Every year, the trust provides income to the diocese equal to 5% of the balance that's in the trust. These calculations are made June 30th of each year, and we know that starting in January of the next year, how much money comes to the diocese from the trust. For instance, this last year on June 30th in 2017, the balance in the trust over the last 48 months was $74,622,000. Now, we used a 48-month rolling average, so in June 30th, we look back over the last 48 month ends, how much was in the trust, and we average that out. This takes out some of the highs and lows over a shorter term. If we were just looking at the balance on June 30th of each year, it could vary widely over the prior year. This last year would be a good example of that. So by going to a 4-year average, you kind of take some of the highs and lows out of that. 5% of 74 million gives us 3,731,112. So on June 30th or thereabouts each year, we know, starting January of the next year, how much money the diocese has coming in. And indeed, for 2018, the operating distribution from the trust to the diocese is just $3.7 million. Okay, so the trust is this bucket of water. There's money going into it, money coming out of it. Now, money going into the trust, there's no new contributions to the trust. The only way the trust grows and gets bigger is through earnings and appreciation of the value of the investments in the portfolio, like your own investment accounts. There's a number of things that come out of the trust, however. The biggest one, of course, is the operating distribution. You can see $3.7 million in this current year. We also have investment fees. As you may know, we have a loan against the trust to finance Project Jubilee. We're going to talk about it a little bit. We have semi-annual interest payments on that loan, and then we have principal payments on the loan. All those things come out of this tub of water. Okay, this is basic common sense. If the inflows coming into the trust are more than the money coming out, the trust balance grows and earns more revenue in subsequent years. Conversely, if the money coming out of the trust is more than is going in, the balance is going to decline. Now, the investment portfolio for the perpetual trust is managed by investment managers with particular expertise with institutional investments and particularly endowments and trust funds. The trustees work closely with specialists to specify the appropriate mix of investments with benchmarks and monitor performance. Our current investment firm is Morgan Stanley. That was changed in October from State Street Global Investments out of Chicago, which we've used for something less than 10 years. And you'll see why it made a big difference, actually. Now, the fund grows like any other investment portfolio through dividends, earnings, and again, the appreciated value of the investments in the trust. The annual operating distributions to the diocese are withdrawals from the trust balance and the largest source of outflows. But in addition, there are other things that come out of that balance as well. We have investment fees. These nice guys at Morgan Stanley don't work for free, and you manage a $75 or $100 million portfolio, there are charges for that. They also provide analytical reports that we use to analyze the performance. We pay interest on the Project Jubilee loans, and I'll give you a hint of what that's like coming up. We also make principal payments on this Project Jubilee loan periodically as well. And finally, we have operating expenses that the trust pays. They pay accounting fees, administrative fees, a small honorarium to the trustees that serve on the board of trustees for the trust. We have bank fees and those kind of things as well, general operating expenses. I have to say the reason we're here is the outflows from the trust now consistently exceed the money going into the trust. And so this tub of water, the balance is going down and will continue to do so unless we make some changes. So why is it going down when it's been going this way for so long? The reason is primarily inflows. We're in a very low interest rate environment, and earnings simply aren't what they have been for, frankly, historically. The outflows are largely unchanged. That 5% formula has been in place since we started this in the mid-1990s. We'll talk about how that came about too. The administrative fees and the bank fees, all that stuff is more or less the same as it's been for a number of years. What's happened is the earnings are simply down from what they've been historically. Now, when this 5% distribution was established, that was a common methodology. In other words, we don't do this in a vacuum. There are millions of endowments and trusts throughout the country and throughout the world. Everybody managing somebody else's money, which is what this is. The trust is for us. It's for our benefit, managed on our behalf to give us perpetual income. That's why it's called a perpetual trust. But there's thousands of these. We're not in a unique place. That 5% withdrawal was the common thought about this. And matter of fact, we commissioned a very expensive study when we first set this up to determine that figure. And matter of fact, for 75 years before 1995, that figure held up. They did analytical processes, and going back 75 years, you could take the 5% a year out. It would make enough earnings to pay that money back, plus pay the other fees you saw there, and life would be hunky-dory in perpetuity. We are now at a new normal place. Just like every other trust and endowment, that 5% rule doesn't apply to anybody anymore. Part of our research the last 18 months is to determine what is that new number that's going to work out in the future. But clearly, the 75-year history we banked on and was a good business decision no longer applies. We're in a whole new place. Now again, it's important to remember that trust is a charitable trust like an endowment. It is managed conservatively for that reason. If you have a retirement account like an IRA or some kind of account like that, or a 403b, 401k, it's for your retirement. There's different windows, aren't they? When you're young, a little more aggressive portfolio, more equities, not so much fixed income stuff. When you get within 5 years of retirement, the advice generally is to shift that to lower risk investments, which means lower yielding investments. Well, an endowment or a trust, when you're holding somebody else's money, there's always that underlying theme of conservatism. And matter of fact, there are regulations regarding trusts and endowments to make sure whoever's managing that money does so conservatively. So it would be not appropriate to measure the performance of an endowment or a trust against some more risk-friendly type of investment. If you're a 30-year-old person working on this, you're going to have a whole different set of investments. So when you look at the returns of the trust, you need to compare apples and apples and make sure you compare similar types of things. That you can find other things that would pay differently. If we continue like we have been all these years, the trust is going to continue to decline. That the drains coming out of the fund are something to be ongoing. The balance is going to decline. The mathematical projections, again, this is not fancy, it's in a nice spreadsheet based on what we think the earnings have been and going to be and our expected outflows. The balance of this trust that's now $74 million in 20 years will decline to $46 million, about a 40% decline. And with that, our income will also decline. You can see 2018 on the left-hand side and 2038 on the right-hand side. You saw the balance decline from 74 million to 46 million. Here's what happens to the income. We go from 3.7 million in 2018 to 2.3 million in 2038. And that's if we simply stand here and make no changes. Oh my, is that it?
For this one.
Okay, thank you so kindly.
Now, on your agenda, it says that I will be getting up here once again at this moment, but rather me, I ask the Reverend Trace Browning to come up and to present to the gathered company how budgetary decisions are made in this diocese. Okay, Trace.
Introduction.
Oh,
You missed it.
I'm so excited to move ahead in the agenda that I jumped ahead. All right. So, in the agenda, you can see the introductions of the various members who do the work for us. So, if you would, please, stand at this moment. The people who are on diocesan council, Diocesan Council, those standing there, there is Tyler Doherty, there's Trace Browning, Robert Shoup the Venerable, Ron Kastner, Karen Pogemeyer, and there's me. Trace Browning is the Vice President of Council, and I am the President of the Diocesan Council. Each one of us has one vote, okay? All right, and now the members of the Finance Committee, if you're here, please stand. Members of Finance Committee. Okay, there's Dave Lingo, there's Steve Anderson, Pat Rukoff from St. Jude's in Cedar City. I was having trouble with Cedar City, that's what I was having trouble with. And then Sandy Gerard, is Sandy here? And Sandy Gerard. So these are members of the Finance Committee. Thank you. Finance Committee is a subcommittee of council. They do the work of putting the budget together that the council then ratifies. Okay, Standing Committee members, if you would stand. Okay, there's Susan Roberts from St. Paul's, Reverend Susan Roberts, the Reverend Mary Yonda from St. Stephen's, the Reverend Canon Pablo Ramos from San Esteban, and Nancy Tanner. I'm going down the list, Nancy. Nancy Tanner from St. James, here, members of the Standing Committee. I have ex officio on the Standing Committee, which is to say I have seat and voice, but I do not have a vote. Okay, so those are the members. Now, the Reverend Trace Browning, please. No? No, I thought we have Trace coming.
Scott.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm still here, guys. Not Trace. All right, so, and then if you have questions to ask me later on, do fill them out regarding how decisions are made. Okay, let's go to the first slide, please, there. Okay, as thought by many people in the diocese, many people do think that it's a couple people in the back room telling stories, and then, oh, by the way, we should decide how to do this. But that's not it. What we do is we look very carefully at let's get to the next slide, please. Okay. First of all, you all know that you receive a packet of materials if you are a congregation that receives a grant, asking you to make your grant request each year. Okay? You know that is done, and those are sent back in. Okay? The diocesan staff, in addition to that, puts together their projections of the work in the coming year. All of the material is brought together and then given to the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee meets in the month of August, and they meet diligently in order to put together the budget for the Diocese of Utah. Once that budget is completed, then that budget is sent to the Diocesan Council. Okay. Now, what about the monies from the trust? Okay. As you heard in the previous presentation, that is determined by that 4-year rolling average, and that figure is submitted in order that the Finance Committee and Council knows what funds are available with which to work. Okay. Once all of this work is done, then the Council looks over the budget. They may make changes to the budget because that is the Council's prerogative. The money that's allocated in the budget is under the authority of the council. So if someone, for instance, from a congregation were to come to ask me for funds during the year, and it's not part of the budget, I have to go back to council and bring the request to council. And then council has to deliberate about it to determine whether or not they can find the resources to fund the request. But we do have some reserves. But the council has to deliberate on it. There is a small amount of money that I have available that I can use without council's direct authority and oversight. A small thing, which is the CTI fund, Carolyn Tanner Irish Mission Fund, which is a small amount of money. I also have funds in my discretionary account, but my discretionary account is solely provided for by the gifts from the congregations when I make my visitations. So I think right now my discretionary fund has $200 in it, I think, about that. So that is how that is done. Okay, so once all of this is done, then the diocesan council votes in favor of the budget with whatever changes they might have made. And then once that is done, then of course, then it is published to the diocese at large. So that is how the decisions are made. Now, there is one other step in the process that is there, and that final step is that the standing committee is the body that actually receives funds from the trust and gives the okay to go forward with it, passes to council. So that is another step that's in the process itself. Now, the way we do it in there is we know what it is, and the standing committee okays that. Could the standing committee not okay that? The answer is yes. Ultimately, the standing committee, they've never done this, but the standing committee could say, no, we're not going to allow that much money. But just to be clear, though, that is the standing committee's prerogative to do, because they do have authority in that way. So that is how the budget of the diocese is created. And as I said, as the bishop of the diocese on council, I have exactly one vote, the same as any other council member. The Reverend Canon Steve Anderson, the Reverend Canon Mary June Nestler are ex officio members of council and do not have a vote on council. The treasurer of the diocese, similarly, Sandy Gerard, also sits on council but does not have a vote on council. All right. Okay, thank you. So, I am still up here then. So the question I think that many people have really is exactly how in the world did we get to this place? So let me just pull that out here. You heard regarding the presentation on the Perpetual Trust that when the trust was set up, it was determined that a figure of 5% over a 4-year rolling average could be taken from the trust and then utilized for the purposes of the Diocese of Utah's mission and ministry. And what that means, however, is that in order for the trust to maintain its value, the trust has to receive, as far as income is concerned from its investment, about 8%. Okay, that's in order to maintain the value of the trust. It must earn 8%. Again, when it was first put together back in 1994, that seemed to be a very reasonable expectation that you could have an 8% level. However, since the recession, we've seen that decline. Now, the best thinking that we have from financial people is that the trust could reasonably expect to earn about 6% in any given year. And that's the pension fund of the Episcopal Church works on that figure, about 6%. What that means is that by taking 5%, the trust will continue to decline because the outflow from the trust will exceed the inflow, as Steve Anderson pointed out. And in addition to that, the Diocese of Utah, back in the late 90s, passed through convention Project Jubilee. Now, Project Jubilee, if you were a delegate to that convention when that came through, you most likely voted in favor of, because it was voted overwhelmingly to go forward with Project Jubilee. And Project Jubilee did many things. One, it bought new church buildings. It bought vicarages. It took over mortgages from congregations. So about $8 million, frankly, of the Project Jubilee was to take over mortgages from congregations, so congregations no longer had to pay those mortgages. Okay. So all of this work flowed together under the banner of Project Jubilee, and there's only one congregation in the diocese that did not receive any funding from Project Jubilee, and that is Spirit of the Desert in Ivins, Utah. And the reason that happened was because they weren't in existence yet. So that was the only congregation that did not receive funding from Project Jubilee. The total amount that was utilized and a loan was made for that was $32.5 million. And that's guaranteed by the Perpetual Trust. Now, Zions Bank is the carrier of that loan, the $32.5 million loan, and lo and behold, they expect to be repaid. Really, they do. Even though we're a church organization, they expect to be repaid. And so part of the outflow of the trust is on debt management. Okay, as one of the trustees said, if we didn't have this loan, we'd be in great shape. But we have this loan. Now, over the period of time that that loan has been there, I am happy to report that the trust has paid $10 million on that loan. So the loan now sits at $22.5 million. This is good news, which we'll go over later in the presentations coming, because that means that as we pay interest, there's less interest to be paid. Okay. So what the trust has done in its management of this debt, this loan, is to repay this. Now, when you combine all of these factors with the rise in healthcare costs, because we spend about $500,000 a year on healthcare costs for the clergy of the diocese and workers of the diocese, while the rising cost of healthcare has impacted this as well. There has been some inflation, of course, as well. So all of these factors roll in together, and indeed, we can no longer count on that 8%. And one other huge factor is in place regarding the markets and how we got here, and that is that it used to be the case that if one executed something in the market, it took some time to go through. Nowadays, a person can execute a billion-dollar trade with the press of a button, and it will go through immediately. Now, what that has done to investing is it's made the market awfully twitchy, highly reactive. You see, and you've probably seen this already, been reading all the reports on the swings in the market that can take place, because all it takes is one person to do something like that, or just a rumor to go out, and the markets go crazy. So it's not going to go back to the way it was 30 years ago. This is the new environment that we happen to find ourselves in. And so the best thing we can do is prepare. The other thing that happened that got us to this place is that, as you heard in the presentation given, the rules of the trust say that the Diocese of Utah can take or receive from the trust 5% of the earnings of the trust over a 4-year average. Okay, 5%. Now, the trustees have no power of their own to deny that. The rules of the trust govern that. So the trustees cannot say, we're only going to do so much this year, nor can they exceed it. But 5% is to be given over for the work of the Diocese of Utah. All right. So now then, what has happened since the inception of the trust in 1994, when the Standing Committee voted together to implement and create the trust. I was on the Standing Committee at that time, as a matter of fact. And I was one of the ones that voted in favor of the establishment of the Perpetual Trust. What has happened since 1994 is that there has never been one case until 2017 when the diocese did anything except take the full 5%. So even when that 5% was $7 million, the diocese took all $7 million, and by the way, they didn't necessarily put anything aside for a reserve account. So even after all of those years, what happened when I got here, the reserves of the diocese were about $200,000. And that was after year after year, $7 million of a budget. In other words, the diocese lived large. So in 2017, the Diocesan Council decided that we needed to do something, and so for the first time, they decided to take less than the full 5% that was actually available. And so what they did is they created the budget, or had the budget created, and then they went in and reduced the amount from the trust by $25,000. Now that's less than 1%, of course, but it was a beginning. It was a beginning, actually. Now, also for 2 conventions ago, you received a report at convention that we saw this coming down the line. And so we needed to start working on deciding or determining what we could do going forward. And so members of the Finance Committee and trustees got together to create scenarios about possible paths forward that the diocese could take. And those scenarios were given over to the Diocesan Council for their review and prayerfully reflect upon what course of action to take in this matter. And after looking at the scenarios, and one was to reduce funding down to 3% and do it in one big step, which probably would have resulted not only in laying off staff, but closing of a number of congregations. That was one scenario presented. What the Diocesan Council accepted was a scenario that said that over the next 4 to 5 years, we would try to reduce the funds from the trust by $1 million overall in a period of 4 to 5 years, beginning in 2018. Now, as stated, I do not make the budgetary decisions for the diocese. What I did do, however, for 2018 was say that as the bishop of the diocese, I thought that the first round of adjustments should happen through impacts to what we call the diocese, but not the congregations. As if when we use that term, it always bothers me because we say, I think the congregations are part of the diocese, a large part of the diocese, but we use the term diocese for meaning really diocesan staff, and also trying to increase revenue as well. So I made the decision as the bishop to go to council and say, and to the finance committee and to the trustees and say, I think the first round of the adjustments needs to take place in a way that shields the congregations so they do not face this in 2018. That gives the congregations a year to continue their work to develop it before any impacts hit congregations. So this was taken to the council, and the council, I met absolutely no resistance from council on this idea, which was one of the first times I've never had resistance from council. So that is really how we got to where we are today. It's been a combination of factors. It's been our own behavior as a diocese, and there are factors which are simply largely out of our control, such as what the investments return. So that is how we got to where we are and why we are stepping into this now in order to preserve for a future generation the value, as much as we can, as the value of the trust. To do anything other than that is just simply bad stewardship. And we just can't continue in that way. So I'm really proud of the council for taking the steps that the council has taken at this time. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now then, let's go here to Canon Anderson.